Good morning, good people, brothers, sisters, and beautifully defiant siblings in the movement. Welcome to the unapologetic voice of labor, equity, and action. This is CWA Our Power Radio Show, where we amplify the organizers, uplift the everyday workers, and honor the giants whose shoulders we stand on right here on KYOK 1140 AM and 106.5 FM in the heart of Houston, Texas. If you're rolling through H-Town or just fired up in the world, stream us live at kyokradio.org on the CWA Strong app or catch the replay anytime by visiting CWA Strong app, searching for CWA Hour of Power, because this space, this time, it's about us. That's right, it's about us. We're talking union contracts, organizing victories, labor rights, human dignity, fair play, and bold everyday resistance to injustice in all its forms. So whether you're on the job, in your car, at your kitchen table, or deep in the fight, lean in, honk your horns if you stand with workers, throw a fist up if you know your worth. Joining me today are the fire starters and truth tellers, Mikeya Jones, Sir Reginald Small, Timmia Wiley, Tay Akins, and David Marshall. So buckle up, beloveds, because the power we build together, that power is ours. So let's get into it. Our union voices are ringing in every district from Alaska to Maine, Texas to Minnesota, Canada to Puerto Rico, because we don't play at CWA. The Communication Workers of America invites you to the 2026 National Human Rights Conference happening August 16th through the 19th in the beautiful Atlanta, Georgia. Join our union leaders and activists from across the country as we come together to build power, advance justice, and fight for workers' rights. This year's conference will be held at the Westin Peachtree Plaza, located in the heart of downtown Atlanta. To register, visit CWA.org. Click on the Workers' Rights tab, then select the Human Rights tab and follow the instructions. Don't miss this opportunity to connect, learn, and organize for a stronger, more just future. We'll see you in Atlanta. Women's History Month is more than a calendar recognition. It is her story. It is the untold, undertold, and sometimes deliberately erased contributions of women who built movements, shaped labor, protected families, and shifted power in the country. Her story is not just about first. It's about force. It's about foundation. It's about the women who organized when wages were unfair, who negotiated when systems resisted, who showed up in the union halls, the courtrooms, classrooms, fields, hospitals, and city councils and demanded change. Women have always been at the center of labor, fighting for minimum wage, fighting for workplace protections, fighting for equal pay, fighting for dignity on the job. And this month, we don't whisper their names. We're amplifying them, because when women rise, workers rise. When women organize, communities stabilize. When women lead, power shifts. This is Women's History Month. This is her story. And today, we spotlight the collective power of women. Asian Pooh, Monica Ramirez, Raquel Willis, Mackenzie Scott, Jody Allen, Rashima Saljana, Tarana Burke. And so now we turn it over into Mikeya's hands.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So as we close out Women's History Month, we're not uplifting just one voice. We're lifting up collective power, because the truth is no movement is built alone. And no contract gets won alone either. That's union work, that's solidarity, that's people coming together and saying we all deserve dignity on the job.
And when we say dignity, we mean everybody, every race, every background, every identity, because labor rights are human rights.
Right. So let's start with Ajin Poo. She organized domestic workers, caregivers, nannies, home care workers, folks whose labor was overlooked for generations.
And let's be real, because a lot of that workforce is women, immigrant women, women of color, folks doing essential work without essential protections.
She helped push forward standards, protections, and recognition because union values say no worker is invisible.
Then you have Monica Ramirez. I'm going to say her name again, Monica Ramirez. She's out here fighting for migrant workers, women, talking about wage theft, harassment, unsafe conditions.
And that's where organizing means protection, because it's one thing to have a job. It's a completely different thing to be safe doing said job.
Exactly. Contracts should protect people, not just positions. Now, let's talk about Raquel Willis, because when we say all workers, we mean all workers.
And that most definitely includes trans workers who are often pushed out, underpaid, or in unsafe working conditions.
And that's where labor has to lead this movement, right? Because the union isn't just about wages. It's about dignity, it's about respect, and making sure nobody is treated less than human.
And Raquel Williams, I'm sorry, Willis reminds us that inclusion is not optional, it's foundational.
And now let's shift to economic power, right? Mackenzie Scott has changed what giving looks like. Billions of dollars, including major investments into HBCUs.
And let's be clear about this, that impacts workers, faculty, staff, campus workers, future workforce pipelines.
And she's giving unrestricted funds, meaning institutions can decide how to support their people. That's trust, that's power being redistributed.
And then there's Jody Allen. Ownership matters.
Okay, because when women are in ownership spaces, the decisions shift. Let me just tell you.
And labor has to stay engaged in those spaces because ownership impacts wages, conditions, and job security.
Right. And let's talk about building the future workforce. Reshma Saujani is opening doors in tech for young women.
And y'all, that matters because access to high paying industries changes entire communities.
That's pipeline work. That's long-term labor strategy. And we cannot close this out without Tarana Burks because workplace safety is non-negotiable.
You're right. Too many workers, especially women, have had to choose between a paycheck and their safety.
And that's unacceptable. Union contracts fight for protections, accountability, and safe environments because nobody should have to endure harm to earn a living. And when you look at all of these women together, this is what herstory really is in real time.
It's about organizing, it's protection, it's access, it's ownership, it's accountability. And at the center of it all, people, not just workers, not just titles, but people. Because every policy, every contract, every movement impacts everybody's life, their ability to eat, their ability to rest, their ability to provide.
Correct. So as we close out this month, let's remember women are not a side note in labor. Okay. I'm just trying to say the people who go into labor should not be a side note of labor, but sure. Women are the strategy, women are the structure, women are the strength.
And her story is not about separation, it's about connection, seeing each other, valuing each other, fighting for each other. Her story
Herstory
is
is
power.
power. Herstory is labor.
Her story is human.
And herstory is still being written. As we close out Women's Herstory Month, let's be clear. Herstory does not end when March ends. The women we honor this month didn't fight for applause. They fought for access, they fought for equity, they fought for economic justice, and from the fields to the factory floor, from the courtroom to Congress, from picket lines to policy tables. Women have shaped labor in ways history books often minimize, but we all know the truth. Women organize strikes, women negotiate contracts, women build and have built voting coalitions. Women sustained movements when cameras left. Women demanded fair wages when minimum wage was stalled. And women fought for discrimination in hiring and pay and in promotions. So herstory is the reason we have workplace protections today. Herstory is the reason conversations about equity even exist. And the power of women is not symbolic. It is structural. It changes laws, it changes wages, and it changes opportunity. So, as this month closes, here's the reminder: women are not an addition to history, women are architects of it. And if we want stronger unions, stronger cities, stronger communities, stronger civilization in general, we must continue centering women's voices, women's leadership, and women's labor. Because history is not a moment, it's a movement, and it's still being written. Back to you, Errol.
I don't know about the guys, but you guys are hot this morning. So I guess you guys had to get some things off your chest.
Period, Pooh.
All right. Thank you guys for that wonderful segment. You're listening to KYOK 1140 AM in the all new 106.5 FM. If you're on the go, you can take us with you by visiting kyokradio.org and pressing the listen live option. Tune in live every Thursday at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on kyokradio.org, the CWA Strong app, or your preferred podcast player. Search for CWA Hour of Power on your favorite podcast player. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at CWA National Human Rights to stay connected. Share your thoughts and join the conversation. Up next, we have Tea with Tay.
Good morning, KYOK family. Good morning to my union siblings out there. So, welcome back to Tea with Tay. And as we know, we're closing out Women's History Months. So, today we're not just celebrating her story, we're telling the truth about what women are facing right now. Because the numbers, they don't lie. So, grab your cup. It's time to pour up. Let's start here. As of early 2026, the overall unemployment rate for women sits around 4.1% to 4.3%. Sounds stable until you actually break it down. Because when you look at women across races, Black women about 7.0%, Hispanic women about 5.0%, white women about 3.3%, Asian women about 3.2 to 3.8%. Same economy, same workforce, very different realities. Now, here's what stands out. Black women are experiencing nearly double the unemployment rate of white women. And in 2025, Black women lost an estimate of 250,000 to 300,000 jobs. Do you hear me? 250,000 to 300,000 jobs, making up a disproportionate share of job losses among women. And it doesn't stop there. Many women aren't even counted in these numbers anymore because they've left the workforce entirely. We're talking about women dealing with burnout, lack of childcare, wage gaps, cuts in public sector jobs. So when we say unemployment, we're not even seeing the full picture. Now, one question that comes up a lot is this: if things are so uneven, why do Asian women constantly show the lowest unemployment rates?
So hold on a minute, Tate. Help me understand this. So if everyone is in the same economy, why do Asian women have why do they actually have lower unemployment rates? But before we go there, Tate, you mentioned a number that is actually staggering, and you're saying, I believe you said in 2025 we lost almost 300,000 jobs. Which I believe were accredited to Black women losing that many jobs. And I was just reading a report that indicated that a whole lot of that percentage, and the reason that number is so high is just because of the federal government Doge cuts that took place in 2025, which spiked those numbers even more. But back to my original point, I just wanted to point that out. But if everyone is in the same economy, tell me, why do Asian women have lower unemployment numbers?
That's a good question, and that was a good point to point out as well. So thank you, Reginald. Uh, and the answer is layered. First, many Asian women are concentrated in more stable industries like healthcare, techs, and professional roles. Second, on average, there are higher levels of formal education, which can lead to more job stability. But here's what people don't always realize. Asian is one big category that includes many different communities. Some groups are doing very well, others are struggling with high poverty and unemployment, but that gets hidden in the average. And one more thing, unemployment only counts people actively looking for work. So if someone steps away, whether it's for family, burnout, or lack of opportunity, they're no longer counted. So lower unemployment doesn't always mean better outcomes. It just means a different story is being told. So during Women's History Month, yes, we celebrate progress, but we also have to face reality because women are not at the monolith. And right now, some women are holding steady and some are being pushed out. And some are disappearing from workforce altogether. And if we're serious about equity, if we're serious about it, we have to look beyond the surface and deal with what the numbers are really telling us because her story is still being written. And right now, it's telling us we've got work to do. So, really think about the numbers that I gave you here today. Sit with them. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and join the conversation at the CWA National Human Rights. What does economic equity for women look like for you? So, this was Tea with Tay today, and I hope I left you with something to sit on. You all have a great rest of the show. Back to you, Errol.
Thank you so much, Tay, and thank you for all of that information. That tea was surely hot this morning. You're listening to KYOK 1140 AM and the all new 106.5 FM. If you're on the go, you can take us with you by visiting kyokradio.org and pressing the listen live option. Tune in live every Thursday, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on kyokradio.org, the CWA Strong app, or your preferred podcast player. Search for CWA Hour of Power. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at CWA National Human Rights to stay connected. Share your thoughts and join the conversation. Up next, we have the Marshall Minute with David Marshall. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Errol, and good morning, family, and welcome to the Marshall Minute. With the clocks moved forward and the sun out and shining, it's time for us to open up those windows, deep clean those closets, and declutter those drawers and shift the vacuum into overdrive. To me, there are few things more satisfying than a completion of a proper spring cleaning. The practice of spring cleaning is a time-honored ritual that's rooted in cultural tradition. It dates back to the days when homes were heated with wood and coal and lit by lanterns that left layers of soot on every surface, so that when spring arrived, it was time to open up the windows, open up the doors, pull out the rugs and bedding to beat away the dust, and scrub the floors and windows until they shined. Well, today, families are busy with work and school. There is less time to clean, so springtime has become a catalyst of sorts for less routine chores. To me, it's symbolic. It's a time to come out of hibernation and let the sunshine reveal all the dust that's left behind. So why does this age-old tradition, which happens to involve a great deal of physical labor, create such a strong sense of satisfaction? Well, the answer doesn't necessarily lie inside your closet. First, it lightens your mood. There's more to cleaning than sparkling floors and clutter-free countertops. It eliminates stress. Clutter overwhelms your senses and weighs you down. It's also a reminder that our work is never done. And by creating an orderly, organized home, we are existing influence over our environments. And since there's very little stress or anxiety we can control in our life, simply creating a more organized personal space can make us feel at ease. But secondly, it improves your health. According to the American College of Allergy and Asthma Immunology, a good spring cleaning can help you breathe better. If you're prone to allergies or an asthmatic attack sufferer, Don't assume pollen is the primary offender. Powerful asthma triggers such as dust and pet dander float on small air currents and settle on every surface in your home. So a thorough cleaning of your home can help eliminate allergens and keep new ones from coming in. And when you feel better, it's a whole lot easier to relax. Third, it will increase your productivity. If you haven't used or worn something since last spring cleaning, it might be a good time to get rid of it. Cleaning and decluttering your home can save you time when you're looking for misplaced items and save you money you'd spend on replacing them in the future. Knowing there's a place for everything gives you a peace of mind. And this goes for the office too. And I can tell you, myself and one of the other hosts on this show have papers and gadgets spread all over our desk. And clutter will make it difficult for your brain to filter that information. So if you think you're hindering your productivity, then purge it. It's really that simple. Next, it's good exercise. You don't have to have a gym membership to work out. Like any physical activity, spring cleaning can burn calories. Now, I'm not saying stroll around the house for 10 minutes with a feather duster. That's not going to do very much. But 30 minutes or more of moderate activity, such as vacuuming, scrubbing floors, all of that can add up. So the more you move, the more calories you'll burn, and you'll reduce fatigue and increase your overall energy levels in the process. Lastly, it will make you feel good about yourself. Spring cleaning also means cleaning out the emotional closets we've accumulated over the years. All that stuff takes up our physical space, but just like too many clothes or a vast shoe collection or too much furniture, all of that clutters up our homes and our minds. So remember, spring is all about new beginnings. Take it upon yourself to use the changing of the seasons to create change in yourself. So until next week, this has been the Marshall Minute, where living well is the greatest act of love. Back to you, Errol.
David, now you know Reginald is gonna get you for that, right?
I added myself to that. We just had a conversation. That's what made the Marshall Minute. We had just had a conversation about our desk and how we know where everything is, but if anybody else had to come in here and find it, it's going to be a bad day.
Yeah, when David said too many clothes, I almost passed out because I'm like, there's just no such thing.
Right. It's like going down an aisle at your favorite store.
Right, and I want to just push everything in the cart. There's no such thing.
Yeah, I'm not going to get him because he's absolutely right. He has a bunch of junk on his desk and I have a bunch of junk on my desk, but it's my functional junk. But I wanted to add to that, David, or even just point out that when I listened to that, you just brought out so many wonderful points there, and it is springtime, time to declutter that. But as activists, as union activists, and just human rights activists, period, with so much stuff being poured on us, so many things in the news, so much stuff that are not just stuff that's media created, but stuff out there, we have to declutter ourselves often to make sure that we stay on target and stay focused and not lose our vision of what our role really is. So that decluttering stuff is really important now, that we don't get clogged down and that we stay the course.
You're absolutely correct. And that's why in my home, we have a catch-all room. And now that's the room that needs to be decluttered and spring cleaned. Everything else is clean, but that room, it is called it. You hear me? You listen to KYOK 1140 AM and y'all new 106.5 FM. If you're on the go, you can take us with you by visiting kyokradio.org and pressing the listen live option. Tune in live every Thursday at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on kyokradio.org, the CWA Strong app, or your preferred podcast player. Search for CWA Hour of Power on your favorite podcast player. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at CWA National Human Rights to stay connected, share your thoughts, and join the conversation. All right, family, let's lean into something real for a moment. Today's conversation is about workplace sexual violence, but let's be clear, This isn't just about individual behavior. This is about power, power on the job, power over schedules, paychecks, promotions, and what happens when the power goes unchecked. Now, too often, these conversations get pushed into the shadows. People are told to stay quiet, handle it themselves, or worse, accept it as a part of the workplace culture. But here on CWA Our Power Radio, we don't do silence, we do solutions, because the truth is, this is a labor issue, plain and simple. And when we talk about worker power, dignity, and respect on the job, this has to be part of that conversation. So today we're going to break it down, why it happens, why folks don't report it, and most importantly, how unions play a critical role in preventing it and protecting the workers. Now, we have Mikeya, Timmia, and Tay here, but we also have two guests in our studio. We have with us this morning Miranda Martone, founder and CEO of the Sexual Violence Prevention Association. And then we also have Katie Knick, Director of Research at the Sexual Violence Prevention Association as well. So now, Tay, I'm going to turn it over to your hands and let you take it away this morning.
Thank you, Errol. So let's talk about it. When we hear sexual violence in the workplace, what comes to your mind? Harassment.
And is that for all of us or what?
I would like y'all all to answer. Unwanted touching.
All right. And Omni and Katie, you guys can come off mute because this is a part of you all as well here.
So what I was saying, I'm sorry. So harassment is what I have. Unwanted touching.
Okay.
What else comes to your mind? Pressure, retaliation, inappropriate comments.
Yeah,
So that's what all comes to me.
like a especially huge shift in like a power dynamic, struggle, like with comfortability, all of that. I mean, nobody wants to work like that.
Do you think most people recognize it when it's happening, Mikeya?
No, I don't. And that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to have this conversation. Because sometimes as women we don't even realize, and because this is Women's History Month, so this is what we're talking about, women specifically. But sometimes we don't even realize what's happened, or it's been so normalized in society that we think that, or we don't recognize that it happened to us because it's not as bad as something that we've seen or we've heard happen to somebody else.
All right, Katie, you got is Katie? Katie was shaking her head, so that means she had something to say behind that. So jump right on in, Katie.
I agree. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems and one of the biggest reasons that we have underreporting is because a lot of times people don't realize that what happened to them was sexual harassment. And specifically within the workplace, there's a lot of other reasons for folks not reporting. And that, the number one reason that people have cited is fear, that they have fear of retaliation, of losing their job entirely, of losing hours or promotions, or not being believed, or being blamed for what happened to them. And so this all kind of culminates in this really big problem of silence and, non-accountability when things like this happen in the workplace.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, Katie, because that was the second part to the reason why I wanted to have this conversation on the show. I think that a lot of times we're women or survivors are always considered like survivors, like, oh, don't call them survivor. I mean, don't call them victims. They're survivors and everything. But we never point out what happened in the first place. And in order for me to have overcome something, that means I have had to go through something. And that part is just as important to my story as the successful part or as the triumph. And so, like you said, when it comes to that, like power imbalance, that lack of accountability and that toxic culture, we have to point that out.
Absolutely.
You're absolutely correct. Absolutely. Now, Omni, I'm going to bring you on in here because we don't want you to sit back in the bushes and be quiet. I want to ask this question. Do you think that people abuse power more because they can or because they know they won't face any consequences?
I think that that's a little bit of both. I think that in
Hmm.
general, power often comes inherently with an ability to act without consequences. And all forms of sexual violence and harassment and things are a result of power imbalances. They're
Hmm.
a result of, one person having power over another. And I think the most classic example of that in the workplace is, a supervisor who has control over their employees' career or their income or their schedule or their hours or anything like that, right? Or their promotion, and that they weaponize that control, right, to commit a form of sexual violence, right? Just to weaponize
Hmm.
that to say, oh, if you don't do this or whatever. And that is, I think, rather understood these days, not super well, but still relatively understood. That's kind of the classic example. I think what's often not understood is that there's other forms of power and control. So there's power and control, for example, in many industries between the clients and the workers. We see this often in the restaurant industry. We see this with flight attendants, for example, where the flight attendants and restaurant workers are often harassed by the clients themselves because the clients control those employees' tips, their career, they can make a complaint, etc. And that's just like, another form. And there's a lot of other very, very similar instances of workplace sexual violence that are often overlooked because it's not a supervisor with somebody who's a subordinate. And so to get back to what you're talking about in terms of accountability and if people commit sexual violence because they think they can get away with it or because they have the power, I think it's kind of one and the same. People often commit sexual violence because they know they can get away with it or they know that the power that they have will allow them to escape accountability. And so those power imbalances, as I was saying, they can come from a workplace, situation like a client and an employee or a supervisor and employee or two different employees, but they can also come from systemic factors, right? So this looks like things like sexism, which is something we've broadly talked about that a lot of people are aware of, but can also come from racism, transphobia, homophobia, and in a sense where, a perpetrator who might be like a white cis man committing sexual violence against a black trans woman, for example, that white cis man knows he's going to get away with it. He knows he's going to not be held accountable, not just because, let's just say, they're two employees in a workplace, not just because their workplace policies won't cover it, but because the black trans woman isn't going to be trusted or helped or supported in broader society. And most sexual violence has multiple forms of power and control, whether they be from a workplace or whether they be from, the general oppression and characteristics of the people who are the victim and the perpetrator. So a lot of times I think it's a kind of a combination, but it does all come down to power. And I think that's why unions themselves and working with unions and being within a union is so important because the unions inherently are about power. It's giving power back to the workers. It's saying let's create structures of accountability to hold workplaces themselves accountable and higher ups accountable and to hold each other accountable to make sure that we are making a safe environment. And that includes being free from sexual violence. And that includes addressing the inherent power imbalances that come up and how they've been weaponized.
So let's
So,
take a step back. We're gonna take a step back really quick, right? Because
yeah, go
we
ahead, go ahead.
we jump right into it because this is a continuum of our Women's History Month town hall last night that our National Women's Committee put on. And so, really quick, if you both don't mind, just introducing yourself really quick and telling us about what you do, just so that the listening audience can get an idea of who's speaking, because clearly you have a wealth of knowledge, you know exactly what you're talking about, and we just want them to know who you are from your own mouths.
Sure. So I'm Omni, my pronouns are they and they, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Sexual Violence Prevention Association. We're a national nonprofit dedicated to preventing sexual violence systemically. This looks like a lot of things, but primarily we work within three pillars. The first is on research, the second is on legislative advocacy, and the third is on education and organizing. And so right now we're starting a new initiative and working on a new initiative about unions and how unions are an effective mechanism to prevent sexual violence. Some of the effectiveness of preventing sexual violence is inherent to unions. Unions are already doing this. And then there's also some additional things unions can do to strengthen the way that they prevent sexual violence. But I'm also going to pass it over to Katie to introduce herself. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Research at the Sexual Violence Prevention Association. So, as Omni was mentioning, we really have kind of a research first model. So, we believe that research should inform policies, education, and programs. And so, I'm kind of working on that first pillar of really understanding the problem and making sure that we are well versed in what's going on so that we can work on policies to prevent sexual violence.
I have a question for you guys that when Omni was talking, I started thinking about patriarchy. So would patriarchy have anything to do with this?
Yeah, patriarchy and sexism and the systems of like rape culture, a lot of those things are very intertwined. Rape culture is largely, I would say, based on white supremacy and patriarchy combined, a little bit of both. Very much something that has come about because of those systemic power imbalances. And so oftentimes we view sexual violence and gender-based violence as one and the same. I would argue that sexual violence, once again, it's the weaponization of power imbalances, and a lot of those power imbalances come from systemic forms of oppression and inequality, like patriarchy. But it's not just right sexism. So we feel that sexual violence also very often comes from other forms of systemic oppression, right? Whether that be racism, homophobia, transphobia, etc. And so all of those are at play, and a lot of those systems is what allows people to get it to quote unquote get away with sexual violence, and is also what creates a culture where this is normal, and a culture of rape culture of silence, of silencing victims, of criticizing survivors who speak out, all of that stuff. So definitely patriarchy plays a big role, and I would also argue that racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, all of these things, right? All systems of systemic power and control. First of all of those systems are already intertwined, right? Racism, sexism,
Hmm.
homophobia, transphobia, a lot of those have the same roots. They're already intertwined. But all of these systems, definitely intersect with sexual violence, and sexual violence we know is very high amongst all marginalized and oppressed communities. And a lot of that is because of the power imbalances that those communities have.
I would just add as well, that sexual violence is both the result of existing power dynamics, or imbalances, and also a tool to gain and maintain power, control, and oppression. So it's used as a mechanism for keeping those systems in place as well.
So
Wow. Thank
quickly,
you.
what do you guys think that we should do, to should do to, change to make it to where folks that have had to deal with this actually feel safe enough to come forward and report it? What can we do to make that an easier thing to do?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Katie directly address your question, but I also just want to very gently push back a little bit on the framing and say that our goal is actually to prevent it before it happens. I think right now a lot of the industry and a lot of the field of sexual violence itself, not even like the workplaces, like sexual violence field, right? Other nonprofits in the space, including the government and governmental actions, not just within this administration, but the previous administrations as well. The focus has really been on, okay, we have to help survivors. And don't get me wrong, we need to. That needs to be a focus. Survivors need to get the resources and the support that they need. That is
Hmm.
vital. That is very, very important. But we're trying to frame the conversation around how do we prevent this before it happens, right? I'm a survivor myself, and I think every survivor that I know speaks to the fact that no amount of support and help will fully rectify the situation. And at the end of the day, it never happening in the first place would, of course, be significantly better. So, how can we prevent that before it happens? And I think a lot of that actually does come back to what you're talking about here. We need to be working with survivors to say what could have stopped this from happening. And so I think part of, when people do report, once we empower people to come forward, which I'll have Katie address directly how we can strengthen the reporting, processes and what happens. But once we have people do that, part of it needs to be what do they need to, like make them, heal what has been harmed. But then also, what do we need to do to change the systems that be, right? To change our institutions and our structures to prevent this from happening in the first place. And so I think that really needs to be a big focus, but I'll have Katie more directly address how can we work with survivors and get their reports, and have this be a thing where we're able to get them the resources that they need, and able to get them to at least in the first place feel comfortable reporting, because so many people don't even know that they can report or feel comfortable doing so. But I'll pass it over to Katie.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, one of the things we talk about, this would be what we call tertiary prevention, which means that we make sure that, following sexual violence, there is accountability. And that means that, that type of prevention comes from someone's fear that there will be consequences if they perpetrate sexual violence. And so safe reporting is really important for that. And unions have a really important role in the workplace for this. We know that workers are going to report more if they feel safe from retaliation, and unions are a really good mechanism for making sure that there's no retaliation for someone filing a report. We know that union representation and support is really important. That looks like things like collective bargaining and collective action. Transparent accountability processes is very important. And having an advocate, someone who can help them navigate the system, because, often sexual violence comes with a lot of trauma. And then having somebody try to navigate a really complicated legal or policy system within their workplace is a lot to ask. And so having someone who's an advocate for them, who can help them understand the system and build trust within that system, goes a long way to making sure that people feel safe reporting. And then, the benefits of that are not only that perpetrators know that there will be consequences and misconduct decreases, but also that then that builds upon other people feeling safe to report. And from a prevention standpoint and from a research standpoint, we get better data and we get more accurate numbers about what's really going on, not only about the volume of sexual violence and harassment that's happening in the workplace, but also about what types. Is this because of a gender identity issue? And if so, how can we address that in this particular workplace? Things like that.
Well, Katie, when you open up, you use the term that I this is the first time that I've heard. Did you say tertiary responsibility, or I messed that word up?
Yeah, tertiary prevention.
Oh, okay. All right.
Omni, do you want to talk a little bit about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. So primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention is how we kind of break down the different mechanisms, structures to prevent
Hmm.
sexual violence. And so primary prevention is preventing somebody from ever wanting to commit sexual violence, right? That's the ideal, right? The most we can do that, the
Hmm.
better. But that is very difficult, right? That often starts very young. It starts with values, beliefs, right? How do we make sure someone has the values and beliefs that means that they will never want to perpetrate sexual violence? This also comes down to making sure people the ways that patriarchy, the ways that sexism, the way that racism, etc., those things often result in people feeling that they have ownership over other people's bodies or feeling that they have a right to commit sexual violence or that that's something that they're owed. So making sure, right, that the values and beliefs also include anti-racism and anti-sexism and anti-homophobia, etc., those beliefs. And also that the knowledge, right, the knowledge of what is consent, what does that look like? And how do these things, cause harm or not cause harm are super, super important. And so all of that is to say, how do we prevent somebody from wanting to perpetrate sexual violence or from thinking that it's normal to do so. So that's primary prevention, but that's quite difficult. That's something that typically once people are in, for example, looking at this from a union or a workplace perspective, that's a little bit too late. People already have our values, beliefs, by the time they're an adult in a workplace. And so
Hmm.
secondary prevention says, okay, well, people already have those values and those beliefs, or they don't have the knowledge they need or whatever, right? And so they either want to perpetrate sexual violence or they think it's so normal that they're just naturally going to do it. How do we reverse those values and beliefs, right? How do we push back against them? How do we make sure that they know, okay, well, that's not accepted here? And that's where we get things like bystander intervention training, so that people can step in when things are happening or when things are about to happen. So that's if, like, somebody makes a a joke or a comment at work, for example, about maybe something like right now we have all of the situation happened with Dolores Berta. And like I'm sure people have seen some of the terrible comments people are saying online about that. Oh, well, she's lying. She should have come home, like she should come forward sooner. Um, Somebody hearing that and knowing as an active bystander, hey, you should not say that. That's not true, and that's not accurate. And you're blaming the victim here for something that was not, her fault. Somebody saying that, right, is intercepting the person who said that statement. It's intercepting that thought and making them think, oh, maybe that's not accepted, right? Maybe this is not accepted here. Maybe victims will be listened to in this environment. So secondary prevention,
Hmm.
once again, it says once somebody already has those values, beliefs, and attitudes, how do we get them to either change their values, beliefs, and attitudes, or how do we get them to realize that's not accepted here and I can't act on that here? And then tertiary prevention says really tertiary bridges the gap between prevention and response. It says once harm has already started to happen, sexual violence has already taken place, or it's continuing continuing, how do we interrupt that? How do we stop that harm from continuing? And how do we make sure that that doesn't move forward? Now, our goal is always primary prevention, because to stop somebody from ever wanting to commit sexual violence in the first place is ideal. And then that second piece says they already want to. How do we stop them from acting on it? And then that third piece says they already acted on it. How do we stop them from doing it again? And so that's primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. I feel like those are very technical terms. It's just basically first, second, and third. It's just like we just put them in order. But it's really like, saying what are the different, places where we can stop people. And in terms of workplaces, usually secondary and tertiary is the best mechanisms, because once again, that primary prevention, that's really things that has to happen. Usually research shows before the age of 12. Like, we're not even talking about high school sex ed programs. Like, even that's a little bit too late. We need to be talking to people at a very young age. And so primary prevention is a little bit more difficult. And primary prevention, to be clear, also includes things like rape culture on TV and all of that stuff. But a lot of that stuff's a lot harder. That's broad change of culture, right? Broad change of values. But yeah, that's a little bit more about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention.
Okay. All right. Timmy, I think you have a question.
I do, but something you said sparked a thought of mine. The media, we have a lot of work to do with the media. They play a huge role in, I think, a lot of this culture. But my question today is, what I know last night you talked about PPP, I think it's 4Ps. Can you tell us, just a listening audience, just a little bit about the systems that should be in place?
Absolutely, yeah. So the 4Ps are policies, programs, practices, and procedures. And so these are, systems or policies in place already within unions. So policies define the rules, programs provide training and education, practices shape everyday workplace behavior, and procedures determine how incidents are handled. And so this is kind of speaking to how unions can be really effective at preventing workplace sexual violence. And so, if you think about some of the entities within this, that includes things like bystander intervention training. So teaching workers how to safely intervene when they see harassment or abuse. It can be things like having regular climate surveys, just, a pulse check. How is the workplace culture? And are people feeling safe and comfortable within their workplace? It also includes things like data collection and research, and making sure that those programs, policies, procedures are up to date. One of the trends that we've seen, when we talk about tracking incidents, one of the trends that we've seen in our field is a rise in non-consensual deep fake. Sexually explicit deep fakes that are made of somebody without their consent is a really big problem right now. And if the programs and policies aren't up to date to not only track and understand that, but also then to respond to it, you're going to be behind the times. And so it's important that those are kept up to date and that workers are informing them, especially those who've been affected. And then another piece would be having industry-specific strategies, because often, as we talked about, something that's happening in the flight attendant industry is going to be very different than what's happening in the, journalism industry, just as far as sexual harassment and sexual violence in the workplace. And so each workplace needs to be able to kind of form its own policies and address sexual violence in its own way, that's specific to what's happening there. And then finally, worker education. As long as people are aware of not only their rights, but their responsibilities as bystanders and as advocates, that will definitely lead to a decrease in sexual violence.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Well, even when you said like the policies need to be updated, I'm gonna go back to it. The media needs to be updated, because so many times when something happens, they focus on what the victim was doing. And that's very defeating for women, and for the victim, I should say.
And if you don't mind, I want to jump in there. I think that is something that even in our own cultures, we have to adjust as well, because a lot of times, as you said, Timia, we blame the victim and not hold the individual responsible that did the victimizing.
Well, and then if you have power and influence, you very seldom get held accountable. Look at how long it takes, from when somebody reports something that there is no action at all. It's like we're giving them the green light to do it. And so I really think that, having consequences and people knowing that there's consequences to this would definitely curb some of it. But it's so much in our day and age. We have if you have the money and power, you don't ever have to be accountable.
Right. And I'm glad that you said that. That whole power dynamic, accountability, consequence thing is like so off balance, where things should be standard, like you commit a crime or an infraction, or you victimize someone, or you attack someone, you should be held accountable for it, and it should be the standard practice amongst everyone, no matter who you are, what you do, what your title says. That should just be the way that it is, and it's not. And I think that goes back again to what we were saying before, when people believe that they have power, they use that power to do whatever they feel like they want to do without consequence, and then that's why people have fear of reporting it. So even like what Timmia said with the media, right? The media is controlled, if we're being honest, by certain people in power. We've seen that. We've seen the media go from a reliable news source to picking and choosing what they want to report on, what they don't want to report on, what's true, what's not. We even got terms now such as fake news. And so I think that it's important for us as regular human beings to speak up and stand out, because like we've been saying, nobody's coming to save us. Nobody's coming to rescue us. And it's our job to make things right for us.
Yeah, and if I may on that, a couple of things on that. 100%, a lot of it comes down to power and money. I mean, that's sexual violence and systemic oppression, all those things are so
Hmm.
intertwined because of that. And I definitely think the way that the media covers it, there's so much to talk about regarding the media, both traditional media and the ways that that's absolutely beyond failing. Survivors and beyond failing to prevent sexual violence, and if not, frankly, encouraging it, but also non-traditional media, right? We see this with like podcasts, like the quote unquote manosphere, with like things like, Joe Rogan and the Tate brothers and all of that, and the ways that that's really, shifting people. And part of this is also because a lot more people's lives these days are spent online. Much more hours are spent online than they are in person. So a lot of culture and community is being driven in a digital space. But the digital spaces, to get back to the point that was just being made, they're owned, right? Elon Musk straight up bought Twitter, right? So these digital spaces, the algorithms, what they
Mm.
promote, what they put in front of us, those are very
Hmm.
intentionally owned by somebody, and they're putting certain things in front of us, and they're making sure that people see things like victim blaming. And I will say there's a few things. Victim blaming is very complicated, but very much something that contributes to rape culture, because if we can blame the victim, there's like so many other things that come from that, and that also contributes to perpetrators targeting people who they know will be blamed, right? Targeting people, the imperfect victim, targeting people who will be blamed, and will that's where slut shaming comes as well. If anyone's not familiar with slut shaming as a term, it refers to how people will blame oftentimes victims who maybe did go out and party, or maybe wore a dress that wasn't as conservative as some people think. But there really knows no bounds. There's slut shaming of even children, and we all know that, like, that's just not accurate, right? Nothing that somebody is wearing ever means that they deserve to face sexual violence.
Right.
And I think some victim blaming definitely also comes down to the fact that we want to feel like we have control. So oftentimes it feels better to say, oh, well, that person went out and partied, and that person wore a really short dress, so I'm not going to do those things and I'll be safe. And that's not true. And the powerful people want us to think that, because then they'll think that we won't blame them for the fact that that's the reason, right? The powerful people are the reason sexual violence is happening. And I think a lot of that also comes down to media and framing. And I think that's part of the reason that we need unionization within the media, right? We're having a lot of reporters come to us and say that they're being silenced, that their reports are being sanitized, or that they're being told to present quote unquote both sides of sexual violence situations. Why are we presenting quote unquote both sides? The factual information is very different typically than both sides. Very rarely is any case of anything 50-50. And yet they're being told, oh, well, we have to do this, or they're getting stories killed, or we're having reporters in mass being fired. That just happened at the Washington Post, which is owned by one of the rich guys. I forget which one. Is it the Amazon one? Somebody owns Washington Post. I think it's
Hmm.
Bezos. And all of a sudden, what was it? A third of the reporters got fired, including they wiped out all of the climate change reporters.
Right. Oh,
Interesting. They wiped out gender and policy reporters. Interesting. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that they don't want coverage of the fact that the rich and the powerful have been committing sexual violence, have been benefiting off of it. To come back to the earlier point of sexual violence isn't just the result of these power imbalances, it's used to gain and maintain power and control. We saw this with Epstein. He wasn't just doing that because he could, he was doing that because it increased his power and control. It gave him dirt on other rich people. It got him influence, it got him money, it got him power, it got him connections. Sexual violence absolutely is a driving force behind the systemic oppression. And as you said, no one's coming to save us. Nobody's been coming to save us. The Epstein survivors have been talking for decades, trying to get somebody to do something, and they've barely been given crumbs. At the end of the day, we need collective power, and that collective power comes from the people. It comes from unions. It comes from people getting together and saying, we're not going to accept this, and we're going to collectively push back against the very, very powerful figures and money that exist. And a lot of that is very vital to preventing sexual violence.
Omni, before we run out of time, because we're right at the mark now, I saw Reginald moving back and forth. So that lets me know that he has something that he needs to ask. So, Reginald, I'm going to turn it over to you just for a few moments, and then we'll close the show out.
I don't really have anything, Errol, that I want to ask. I would like to thank both of you for coming on today and for the presentation last night. It was absolutely wonderful. But there are a couple of things that you said that really touched us here with CWA, talking about the 4 Ps. We've been educated on those 4 Ps, and we're doing our best at CWA. We have developed a policy on mutual respect, which gives an avenue for people to actually come forth and actually have their concerns actually heard in a very legitimate way. And we've worked on that, and it's kind of a growing document that we continue to work on. So we're pretty proud of that within CWA. And also the primary, the secondary, and the third way that you talked about, that developmental stage in that beginning really puts thoughts here in my head that the developmental stage before the age of 12, that goes back into the household or into the community to actually establish those things. And we're living in a time where we don't have much say in those spaces, but that's a very important space there that should be actually looked at a little more. So we in union don't have a whole lot to do with that, other than to educate the parents who are the workers in unions of the job and the responsibility that needs to take place in the home and in the community. But on that secondary piece, we are on it. We are doing our very best here at CWA through this Human Rights Department with our gender justice trainings, our bias trainings, and we actually touch on that education piece quite a bit, dealing with dignity and respect and gender, all of those things that actually lay the foundation that really makes people realize that these people, women, trans people, actually have a beating heart and they deserve to be treated with that respect and dignity, which could help try to prevent that. So again, those are just my ads there, just a shout out for CWA and our Human Rights Department on what we're actually doing. And to thank you both so much for coming on and actually sharing that and spreading the light, shining the light on this very, very, very important subject.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And to be very clear, we reached out to CWA originally because y'all are doing a great job. So we're putting together a report. We're trying to put together a report and a coalition, a union of unions, if you will, a report and a coalition addressing this. And we use CWA and the work that you're doing as an example in that report of how unions are very much positioned very well to address sexual violence. And some unions, CWA being one of them, are already doing that. And how can we replicate that in other unions? How can we replicate that in different industries? And what sort of contract language and what of the 4 Ps, right? The policies, programs, practices, and procedures. How can we replicate those elsewhere? What sort of skill sharing, resource sharing can we do across unions to make this a broader fight? Because once again, sexual violence and is a labor issue, and y'all are doing a great job. And how can we extend that to others? And that's really what brought us here. So thank you so much for having us last night and again today. It's been great speaking with people who I think get it and are excited to take action and are already taking action. We hope we can work with y'all on that report and that union of unions.
We're looking forward to working with you.
Yes, we are. And you have us smiling from ear to ear, and our chest stuck out. Omni and Katie, thank you so much for being with us today. And we appreciate you all for the great job that you all did on last night with the CWA Women's History Month Town Hall. This was a powerful conversation, and we hate to even have to cut it right now, but we're at the end of the show. So as we come down to the final minutes of the show, we just want to remind you that the CWA Human Rights National Conference is in 2026, is in Atlanta, Georgia, August 16th through 19th. Join union leaders and activists from across the country as we together come together and build power, advance justice, and fight for workers' rights. As an hour is not long enough to be with you, and a week is too long to be away from you. You have been tuned into the CWA Hour Power Radio Show. I hope something you heard today has inspired you to take action toward creating positive change in the world. Every person has the power to make a difference, no matter how small, and by working together, we can create a world where human rights are respected and valued. So I encourage each of you in the listening audience to reflect on your role in promoting human rights to effect change in your communities and beyond. Know that you are not alone in your quest for a more just and equitable world. When faced with injustice, it can be easy to lose hope and give up. But remember, justice may be slow like the truth, but when it finally comes, it will stand. Until next Thursday, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, right here on KYOK Radio, 1140 a.m. and the all-new 106.5 FM, KYOKradio.org. See you next week.